Hello everyone and welcome. In the previous episode, we looked at the first half of this Duna mission, launching the Duna 1 and getting ourselves into this low orbit about Duna. And if you need help with that, I would recommend checking that video out, because this video is going to be about the second half of this mission, getting down to the surface of Duna and then getting ourselves safely back to Kerbin. So we're going to start off talking about the descent, and there are a number of ways to get down to the surface of Duna. We're going to be doing it the easiest way for the purpose of this tutorial. And then we're going to talk about how do we get ourselves from the surface of Duna back up into low Duna orbit. Specifically, what kind of ascent profile should you be using in doing that? And then, how do we time our ejection burn to get ourselves back to Kerbin efficiently and as safely as possible? You can see, looking at this, there's actually two vessels here. There's the larger command vessel, which was heavily featured last episode, and I took some time going over its design, but this episode is going to heavily feature the lander. So I think it's only appropriate spending some time going over its design, starting with its Delta V budget. We've looked at Delta V maps before, but this time it's going to be exceedingly simple because we're only interested in one number, this 1,450 meters per second that connects low Duna orbit to the surface of Duna. Now, I want to draw attention to the little arrow that is there. The little arrow is there to tell you that atmospheric drag can be used to your favor for this particular maneuver. How much to your favor? Well, it all depends upon how much drag you can generate, and we're going to generate the maximum amount of drag that we can by using parachutes to safely descend us down to the surface. Now, that doesn't mean this whole 1,450 meters per second is gone. I still have to make a burn to get out of low Duna orbit, and I'm budgeting 100 meters per second for that burn. We also have to get ourselves back up to low Duna orbit, and that 1,450 meters per second is a good number for that part of the budget, so let's add that part on to give us a total budget of 1,550 meters per second. So let's get ourselves into the VAB and take a closer look at our lander. And really, this lander isn't all that complicated. It has a Mark II landing can so that it can carry down 2 Kerbals. I did put on a pro body, which is hidden under here under the fairing. The fairing's actually, I disabled the staging on it, and it's really just there just to kind of clean that up a little bit because I found that this transition just looked really ugly. In fact, if I just put off the fairing expansion, that's what it's going to look like all the time. But the addition of a probe body is nice because that allows you to be able to put non-pilots in here without having any issues, and it only holding 2 Kerbals, I figured an engineer and a scientist would be something that is more useful. And speaking of which, I also made sure that this thing is geared up. It didn't fly up this way, but I geared it up here to make sure that it is going down in the state that I would be planning on using it. So I put in a couple of lights, a repair kit, EVA science pack, of course, there are EVA packs themselves, and a couple of Kerbals, and with all that, it has a Delta V of 1,853 meters per second, well above what our requirements are, so it should be able to descend down to the surface and then get back up to our command ship fairly easily. And speaking of getting down to the surface, I did have to make sure that it did have enough parachutes. There are 8 of them on here. You need a lot more parachutes than what you would need descending through Kerbin's atmosphere because Duna's atmosphere is far thinner than Kerbin's atmosphere. How do you know how many parachutes to use? Well, here I have 8 of them on a vessel that weighs about 8.5 tons. So if you kind of go the 1 parachute per ton type of situation for Duna, remember if you're on different places with atmospheres that would be different altogether, that would feel kind of safe to me. But what I would recommend that you do is actually test this thing. Remember that you can use the cheat menu to Alt 12 your way into any situation that you want. So we'll select Duna here, and now this number here is the semi-major axis, which is measured from Duna's center. Duna has a radius of 320 kilometers. Also, its atmosphere has a height of 50 kilometers, so 370 kilometers puts you right on top of the atmosphere. I'm going to go with 400, and then I got to put in 3 extra zeros because this is measured in meters. And then we'll go set orbit. And here we are in orbit about Duna. And from here, I can put this thing through whatever test I want, secure in the knowledge that I can revert back to the VAB at any time through the pause menu. So I made sure it had enough parachutes to slow itself down so that it would get down to the surface safely. I also took the opportunity to practice my ascent from Duna's surface. I mean, I don't do this as much as, for instance, ascending from Kerbin's surface, so I wanted to make sure that I can do this efficiently. But that's enough of all of this preamble. Let's get ourselves back to the mission. Okay, let's take a look at what we have here. Now, we definitely want to land on the light side of Duna. We also want to land somewhere that isn't too hilly. Now, it is a little bit hard to kind of judge. Down in these, I don't know, does it look hilly down there in those canyons? I'm thinking actually maybe this highland area here might be a good place to try it out. Now remember, we're going to be descending with parachutes, so you might want to do a quick save at this point because you won't have that much control on exactly where it is that you come down, and you might want to give yourself permission to kind of practice this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to time warp my way around to about a third of an orbit ahead of where my intended landing zone is. And then we're going to undock. We'll switch over to the other vessel here. SAS on, RCS. Back away a little bit. We'll put this on to the retrograde vector and get ready to make our burn. Actually, why don't we use RCS again? I'm just going to push myself a little bit forward here so that when I make this burn, I'll be past this thing. I don't have to worry about crashing into it. Okay, let's activate our engine. Get ready to do this. So, again, I want to land in this kind of zone. I don't have to be too precise, but with a little bit of practice, I found out that if I have my trajectory intersecting Duna around here, that the atmosphere slowed me down enough to end up in the spot I wanted to end up, or thereabouts. Slow down a little bit. A little more. It's probably pretty good right about there. Remember that Duna's atmosphere is pretty thin. It's going to slow you down a lot more slowly than Kerbin's atmosphere will. Now, let's, we got to retract our deployables here. So I got that on an action group. 1. Do I not? 1. There they go. So there goes our Communitron and our solar panels. Notice we still have communication, even with that Communitron down through the antennas that are built in. We still have communication with Duna command, so that is good. We need Valentina's piloting skills. Okay, let's just time warp. And again, remember that it's at 50 kilometers that we're going to be starting to go into Duna's atmosphere. But really, during this descent, there's not much for us to do. We're just going to keep it locked on the retrograde vector, make sure our parachutes are armed. Otherwise, it's just like parachute descent from Kerbin. You're just going to let it ride. And you don't have to depend entirely on your parachutes for descent. You can do a powered descent if that's what you want to do. Or you can do a combination of the two. Less parachutes, but then use a little bit of throttle to control the speed right there at the end. All kinds of ways of handling the descent, but I think just loading up with parachutes is definitely the easiest one. So if this were my first try going to Duna, that's the way I would be doing it. Okay, we are getting closer. We're 8 kilometers above the surface. Waiting for those parachutes to deploy. Anytime would be good. There they go. Let's take the time warp off. gear. Deploy the gear. And coming down at a nice 7.3 meters per second. Now it's just letting this come right down. Keep your SAS on, because you want to be ready. If this is hilly below us, you want to be ready to right yourself. And that means just watching the nav ball and just pushing the bird, the ship icon, back to the top of the nav ball, whichever way it happens to go. Okay, we are about 50 meters above the surface. So I'm just going to get ready and touching. And oh, well, we are very level where we are. This is awesome. And we are on the surface of Duna that easily. Okay, well, now, of course, it's science time. We can deploy our ladders here. Deploy antennas and solar panels. Then, of course, comes the requisite flag planting, science collecting, golf ball hitting. But with all of that done, comes the time for us to get back up to our command vessel, which we left in a 70-kilometer orbit. Here, let's set it as a target. And what we're going to do is come in a little bit below and a little bit behind it. And again, don't be afraid to quick save and try this multiple times. There's nothing wrong with that. So we're just going to time warp until the command vessel's a little bit ahead of us. And then we're going to get ready to do our ascent. That should do her. Okay. Now, of course, we're going to retract everything here. Retract our ladder. And, yeah, we're just going to punch it. In many ways, it's the same thing as Kerbin. We're going to launch towards the east. So we're just going to punch it, and off we go. And we're going to pitch over to the east. But unlike Kerbin, whoops, my ladder is still there. Actually, unlike the moon or Minmus, there is an atmosphere, so you don't want to just pitch over like you do with the moon and for Minmus. And at the same time, you want to go over gradually following this prograde vector, but not really necessarily the same ascent profile as you would with Kerbin. And what I found, which is more generic than just doing it with Kerbin, and if you watch this, as we get to the end of this first bar, I want to be at a pitch of about 60 degrees. And that works, I think, pretty much anywhere that you're ascending with an atmosphere. So I'm pitching this over, bringing this over to 60 degrees right around here. And then as we get to the end of this second bar, from here I'm just going to keep following that prograde vector. As we get to the end of this second bar, that is where I'm going to begin to reduce my throttle and keep that periapsis the same sort of time ahead of me. Remember that our apoapsis needs to be above 50 kilometers, but not much above. So I'm going to go for about 55 kilometers. Again, I'm watching this pressure bar. When it gets to around here, I'm going to be reducing throttle. And if you watch my ascents through Kerbin's atmosphere, you'll actually notice I'm doing much the same sort of a thing. Okay, let's start reducing our throttle. I'm noticing that my apoapsis is a little more than 2 minutes away, so I want to keep that number relatively constant, is what I'm shooting for. There we are. And then I'm just going to keep that throttle like that, and then again, just slowly be pitching over, pulling that prograde vector with me. Not going to be doing this for much longer, because I can see here our apoapsis here is at 48 kilometers now. $50 kilometers. I'm going to cut it at 55. And cut. And we'll complete our orbital insertion at apoapsis like we've done countless times before around other bodies. and then perform our rendezvous and our docking, which is also a topic that I've talked about in previous videos. And now comes the moment. How do we get back to Kerbin? Well, just like we had to wait for a certain phase angle in order to get the timing right to come out to Duna, there is another phase angle to transfer back from Duna to Kerbin. Here's a list of all the phase angles you would ever need playing Kerbal Space Program with the stock solar system, and you can see here that what we need is a phase angle with Kerbin of -75 degrees. That means that Kerbin needs to be about 75 degrees behind us. Well, let's scroll on out and see what the situation is. So, here is us, right, coming around in this direction. Here is Kerbin going around also in this direction, but as you can see, Kerbin is actually ahead of us. So we need to do some time warping to get Kerbin to come back to around 75 degrees. Let's see, that's 90 degrees. So in around this position relative to Duna. There's no way around it other than using a whole lot more fuel of doing all of that time warping and waiting months and months and months. It's why in a real Mars mission, if you were ever to come back, you would have to plan that month's time on Mars before you could ever come back to Earth. Again, don't forget, quick save before you do this in case you mess up your time warping. So we can do, I don't know how fast I can go while in around here. Oh, I can do the full time warp, so here we go. Again, we're going to stop early. It's easy to stop early and then just put your maneuver node quite a bit more ahead than it would be to have to go around one more time. All right, let's start slowing this down. So I think we're a little bit past 90 degrees, I would say so. Again, there is a trick for measuring this phase angle more precisely. If we set Kerbin as our target, and we go over to our advanced orbital info, we do get a phase angle. Where is it here? Is it here? No, it's under the rendezvous tab. We do have a phase angle of 148 degrees, but keep in mind that isn't right. That phase angle is only correct when our ship is directly opposite to the sun, because then the line joining our ship to Duna does pass through the sun. So we're just going to time warp until our ship is directly opposite the sun from Duna. I'm going to center our view on Duna here. I think that makes it a little bit better. Do the best you can. This is not 100% precise. Again, squad, if you are listening, give us a way of getting these phase angles exactly and more easily, and I would be very, very happy. This should be something, it's essential information. Okay, you can see here it's about -90, which is about what we would guess it would have ended up being. So again, what we're going to do, we're going to quick save, but we're going to time warp for a little bit. And again, the magic number we're aiming for is -75. Yeah, I would estimate that now about 83, 84 degrees. I think I'm going to set up our exit burn, getting ourselves back to Kerbin. We'll have to pop ahead a bunch of orbits, but that's okay. Again, it's better to solve it early. Now remember again how this works, and it's not too dissimilar from other rendezvous that you did. Kerbin's in a lower orbit. It's coming faster than us, so it's going to be catching up to Duna. So what we need to do is bring down our periapsis relative to the sun down to here so that it will intersect with Kerbin. To do that, we need to add velocity in Duna's retrograde direction. So that means we need to exit Duna going in this direction here. So that means we need to be, if we scroll on in, raising this part of our orbit. So we need to perform a burn on this side of the planet and make this a prograde burn, pushing our way out in that direction. Again, good rule of thumb, is if you are moving inwards towards planets that are inside your current orbit, and Kerbin is closer to the sun than Duna is, you're going to be doing your ejection across the daylight side of the planet. If you are moving outwards, so for instance, if I wanted to go from Duna to Dres or Jewel or Elu, I would be doing my burn on the other side, and my ejection would be across the night side of Duna. We're going to scroll our way out here. And there's our, so we're going to give ourselves a lot more prograde. We want to bring our periapsis down so that it is in contact with Duna's orbit. You also want to time this better. Now, the fact that my apoapsis is way out here actually tells you your timing is way off. The apoapsis should be closer to the body. So what we're going to do is, and you can use the time tools, or you can simply drag this. If we come to here, I can see this is roaring off in the wrong direction. It needs to go more that way, like that. That's a lot closer. See where our periapsis is. Oh, let's start using these tools here. We need more prograde. Bring that periapsis down. And you can start playing with the exact timing of the burn, looking at the periapsis number and trying to get that periapsis as low as possible. You want to have the minimum delta V of this burn that still gets the periapsis down and touching Kerbin's orbit. And you can see our encounter with Kerbin. There's our close encounter indicators, but we're missing by a bit because we are launching too early. No problem. You just start popping ahead orbits. And as you pop ahead orbits, you'll be bringing that close approach closer and closer. And Ike's getting in our way from time to time. You'll find you'll have to adjust the timing here again. You may have to give yourself a little bit more prograde. There they are again. And it does take a little bit of patience, a little bit of playing around, but eventually it will come to you. There it is. Alrighty, let's zoom in on Kerbin and tweak this even further. Let's select our maneuver. Take a look at our periapsis. I'll start by playing around with the timing. See if the timing can go. Is that? Well, I'm hitting the wrong one. There we go. That's bringing it in closer. That's bringing it in further. Maybe a little bit more prograde. Yeah, there we go. That's coming in. Very fine tuning here. You can see we're coming a little bit over the top of Kerbin. Again, remember that Duna's orbit is slightly inclined, so that just necessitates a mid-course correction. But for now, we got our 644 meter per second burn coming up in, well, 73 days. What are we gonna do? Say goodbye to Duna, folks. We are off. Hit it. Bye, Lander. You did a good job. Good enough. The rest of that can be taken care of with our mid-course correction. Remember, the exact timing of this is not crucial. Bringing this down. We're hitting Kerbin. Don't want to do that. Do want to go around Kerbin in a prograde direction. It's this way around. Where's our entry here? There we are. So let's see, radially. No, other way. That's getting pretty close. A little bit more. Okay, we'll fine-tune that once we're into Kerbin's SOI. It's about 35 kilometers, just like we were coming in from the moon or coming in from Minmus. To be honest, our orbital velocity coming back from Duna or from Eve, planets that are relatively close by, the velocity at which we'll be encountering the atmosphere isn't that ridiculously different than it is for when you're coming back from the moon or from Minmus. And after 2 years and 311, well, almost 312 days, we are coming back. And although Duna along with Eve are the 2 easiest planets for you to get to, the basics on how to do an interplanetary transfer remain the same for all of the planets. So why don't we take the opportunity right now to go over the basics from this and the previous video. Number 1 is to plan a budget. You can do this using a Delta V map, or you can do the math yourself if you are so inclined. Then look up or calculate the phase angle that you need and start time warping until the planets approach that phase angle, remembering to stop early. Set up your ejection and start playing with the timing in order to minimize the amount of that ejection burn. Then start popping ahead orbits, making any necessary prograde, retrograde, or timing adjustments until you are at your ejection window. Make that ejection burn, and then expect to make a mid-course correction. That mid-course correction could be very small, like it was with going to Duna, or it could be relatively significant if the planet that you're aiming for is in a more inclined orbit, like the 2 most challenging planets, Moho and Ilu. But with that, I'm going to be drawing this episode to a close. I hope you found it useful, and I hope to see you again for the next one.